Hey everybody, Tom Cherryholmes here with the FujiNet project, and I'm going to make a quick little video here showing the new URL handling that's been added into the code as of last night. We'll start by doing some of the same things that we were doing in the previous video, but using the new URLs. We'll start by loading our in handler, disk, and booting into it. We can see right here everything is as it was before, and if we load the ndev handler, we see she's ready for use. Now this time we'll actually do something a bit different. We'll load the way we did before. Now notice here that we now are using RFC compliant URLs, and yes, they are completely supported with port mappings as well as query strings, fragment identifiers, everything that you can possibly throw onto a URL. Now most protocols will actually just use the host name and maybe a path specification, but all of the various aspects of a URL processing are handled. Well, almost all of them. Username and password cannot be specified on the URL, but they can be added in via in some protocols, for example, through the headers. No big deal. Okay, so you've seen that work. All is good there. If we go ahead now, and actually, let me see if this will, let me go ahead and just reboot so that we make sure that everything stays nice and clean. Because I need to also hold down Option for this next bit. This next part deals with what I call URL prefixes. Various DOSes have limitations on the file specifications that can be sent through the FMS, and they make a lot of assumptions as to what are valid file names, what are not valid file names, etc. And the ESP, the firmware, has to do a lot of processing and translation to try and accommodate all of these various inconsistencies from the different FMSs. To try and help that, I've made a little utility called inprefix, which allows you to define the, implicitly tack on the front part of a URL, ostensibly so that you can only need to specify, say, the last part of the file, like a file name, as part of the path, so that if you want to take and, for example, copy files from an HTTP site or from an FTP site, that will still just work because the FMS will now think that it's a valid file name. So let me demonstrate. Inprefix is a utility that I've taken and put together for this purpose. It will be fleshed out a bit more, but this is the first pass of the utility. And it takes one parameter, the URL that we want to specify as the prefix. Sorry. So we see there, we want to take and always use this as our URL prefix. At this point, in is now mapped to that, and anytime that we use in colon, that first part of the file spec will always be tacked on. But because of that, now we can do things like this. Oop, Actually, it actually helps if the device driver is loaded, huh? And you'll notice that the end prefix utility actually worked even before the handler was loaded, and I'm glad I actually did this now because it shows that the various utilities are talking via SIO directly and are not using the CIO handler. They don't have to, and you as a software developer or user don't have to use the end device if you don't want to. You can talk to the FujiNet over SIO. We'll go ahead and load the device handler now. And we'll do that again. So you see right there, we just loaded a copy of Buried Books from an HTTP server onto the Atari through the end device, into the CIO handler, etc., making all of the required calls to SIO automatically and abstracting all of that away. This also works, this works everywhere because the prefix gets set at the ESP. Now you notice I turned off the Atari, and since I have my FujiNet powered via USB, it stayed on. So everything's still connected, everything is still mounted. If I go to cartridge now, that URL prefix is actually still set. Oh, actually I need the driver, don't I? So there we go. You can see it just works. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. And if we, for example, load something that does not exist, it will try to load it. Okay, maybe it will try a couple of times to try and load it here. If you see, there's a result code of 404. So it will try again, just for the sake of it, because that's how the Atari I/O subsystem works. Will it? We may be stack smashed. So let's try that again. Actually, I'll move on to the next thing. I think we may have smashed our driver just ever so slightly. Again, this is a prototype. So let's go ahead. Unless you think this only works in DOS XL, I have a version of the NDEV handler that I've loaded up into high memory so that it works well in DOS 2 for testing, so that I can test in all the various DOSes here. We shall load config again. And this time, load this guy. Plain DOS 2. And we have our two utilities here, NDEV and mprefix. And actually, you'll notice that we still haven't, since I've reset the FujiNet, I do have to reset the prefix again. But it will give me an opportunity to run the same utility. And since I'm running under DOS 2, it's asking me interactively. So you can see, set there, ready to go. And if I subsequently you can see that it loaded it up just fine. So there are other things that need to happen. And one of these that I will show you is essentially that we also need to do file name translation. And you'll see that this fails because essentially we get a bad file number here. But let me see something real quick. I want to see if we actually get an open that's part of our deal here. Yes, you can see it right here. Atari DOS has actually given us the entire file name here. Atari DOS 2 gave us the entire file name separated by a comma here. And this doesn't make any sense. We need to take and translate this. But this is one of the many things that we actually need to filter out and deal with between all the different FMSs so that something like this will actually work as expected. But you can see here that even when I set the prefix, it automatically did the right thing here and put the file name in. And because I'm using the URL prefixes here, Atari DOS 2 is not complaining that the file name is too long. So this will work. It's just going to take a lot of just working through all of the individual edge cases and some really bizarre ones too. Like say, for example, Sparta-DOS, for example. In Sparta-DOS, the binary loader is not part of the disk utility package. It's not part of the command processor. It's actually inside the FMS as a CIO call, XIO call number 40. And that has to be implemented in my CIO handler so that Sparta-DOS can load binary load files from in devices. Lots of little things like that. But we'll get to them, all in good time. Anyway, so that's all I want to show for now, and more to come. So until next time, guys, have fun.